Emma and I had just celebrated 12 years of marriage, having been sweethearts since we were 10. Instead of college, I went straight into an entry-level job as a draftsman at Desmond Engineering right out of high school. A year later, we got married, and the following year we welcomed twin girls, Bethany and Chloe. Although we faced our fair share of challenges, budgeting helped us make it through. I stayed a draftsman, but moving up a few grades improved our financial situation. We managed to buy a modest home and own 2 decent cars. Not brand new, but they were far from junk. Emma got her wish to be a full-time housewife, and with our stable finances, she didn't need to work. We were both healthy and kept in decent shape. Emma had grown a bit since our wedding day, standing just over 5 feet tall, with dark brown hair and bangs that made her look like a shorter version of Marie McMaxie. I hadn't changed much either since my high school football days playing right tackle. A year ago, Jason Cooper moved to Reading from Lancaster and joined Desmond Engineering as a surveyor. Jason and I had actually played football against each other back in high school, so we became fast friends. He had also married his high school sweetheart, a redhead named Olivia, and as soon as Olivia and Emma met, they became close friends too. Olivia and Jason didn't have kids yet, but Olivia was great with Bethany and Chloe, often acting as their unofficial nanny when Emma or I needed help. Jason and I enjoyed hanging out, giving us a break from family life, and naturally Emma and Olivia did the same. They went shopping, attended parties, and joined clubs together, while Jason and I watched the girls. Olivia had also picked up a secretary job at Gilbert Engineering just outside the city. About 6 months ago, though, I started noticing changes. The PDA meeting, which used to be once a month, suddenly became a weekly thing. Despite not having kids, Olivia was always visiting Emma. The frequency of Tupperware and Magic Chef parties seemed to grow monthly, yet we never actually bought any of their products. They joined a book club but never seemed to find the time to read. On Weemax, they'd go shopping for hours, only to return with next to nothing. Emma's collection of fancy lingerie kept growing, yet I never got to see any of it. I started to feel uneasy about it all, but since Jason didn't seem bothered, I kept quiet. One night, about an hour after putting the girls to bed, Emma got home from another one of her basket parties. Oddly, she'd Tomax a shower before Olivia picked her up, then took another as soon as she got home. Felt strange. While she was in the shower, I checked her basket and found a set of black lace lingerie. Who buys black lace lingerie to wear at a basket party? Normally, I'd never go through her clothes, but something felt off, so I checked, and found her underwear was wet and sticky. I slipped it into my pocket. I'd never gone through Emma's purse or wallet before, but that night, I felt the need to check her cell phone. She must have been confident I'd never snoop, because she hadn't deleted a single call from the last week. Her call logs were full of conversations with Olivia, but also several calls to numbers labeled KC, KH, and KW. I didn't know who these contacts were, but it struck me that C probably stood for cell, H for home, and W for work. I opened her contacts and found that Olivia also had 3 numbers: Olivia S, Olivia H, and Olivia W. Emma's phone organization impressed me. Looking up Olivia's work number, I noticed it had an extension, and then I saw KW's number was the same as Olivia's workplace number, just with a different extension. It wasn't hard to put together. Emma had been calling and receiving calls from someone at Olivia's work, possibly someone Olivia had introduced her to. Gilbert Engineering was closed at this hour, so I dialed KW's number from her phone. A recorded message played from Max Thompson's desk, asking to leave a name and number. I ended the call right there. Just then, Emma poked her head around the doorway, asking if I was coming to bed. I told her I'd finish my book first, maybe even sleep on the couch. It was a restless night. My mind kept spinning, wondering what I did wrong or what I could have done differently. Felt like wasted energy, but my thoughts wouldn't settle. I checked the clock over and over, but it felt frozen. One thing I knew for sure, I wasn't going to take the blame for whatever was going on here. The next morning, I woke up to the sounds of my 2 little girls making breakfast. Emma had taught them to look after themselves instead of waiting for us. I stretched, scratched my head, and Emma walked in, reminding me I'd be late for work if I didn't hurry. I told her I wasn't going in that day due to too many personal issues. With a yawn, I headed for the shower. When I came back, Emma looked a little confused since the girls had already left for school. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. She gave me a look, like she was waiting for me to say something but wasn't sure what. I got straight to the point and asked her about her novel, though I didn't expect her to open up easily. She asked if my downcast mood was because I suspected her of cheating. I didn't hide my answer. I told her yes, I did, and I wanted to hear about this novel. Even after 12 years of marriage, she seemed surprised that I would think that. I repeated that I wanted her to talk about her novel, reminding her I had work waiting and wasn't in the mood for any games. She sighed, leaning in with a little smile, telling me affectionately that her story didn't include any romance. I nodded sarcastically, saying I appreciated her honesty but couldn't bring myself to be grateful right then. She leaned back, sipping her coffee like she had Tomax control of the conversation. I asked if she could answer a few simple questions, and she agreed. I brought up the weekly PDA meetings, explaining that the PDA secretary told me they only met monthly and that Emma hadn't shown up in 6 months. She looked confused and a bit less sassy, saying she didn't know what I was getting at. I pointed out that she and Olivia went to these PDA meetings every Tuesday and asked why she would lie about it. After a pause, Emma offered an answer. She apologized and explained that she and Olivia had actually been going to Rosie's Cantina on Tuesday nights for 2-for-1 margaritas. They hadn't told me or Jason to avoid any misunderstandings. She admitted it was a bad call and promised to be upfront from now on. I said I'd be checking her story, noting that Olivia might back her up, but I'd be interested to hear what the people at Rosie's had to say. In response, Emma insisted I was making too much of it. She quickly turned the tables, asking why I would shower both before and after little Tupperware parties, pressing me on why I'd go to such lengths. I explained that it was to get the smell of smoke out of my hair since a lot of women smoked at those gatherings. But she wasn't finished yet. She questioned why I wore nice underwear to these parties but rarely did for her unless it was a special occasion. I admitted I didn't have a good answer, saying only that I liked feeling dressed up when going out. At that point, Emma's lies were starting to get to me, and I was struggling to keep my anger in check. Realizing it was time to get straight to the point, I pulled out the soiled underwear I'd found the previous night and accused her of being dishonest with me. I told her flat out that I knew the substance on the underwear had nothing to do with me, and I warned her against making some excuse about a yeast infection. My anger kept building as I demanded she give me the truth. Emma fidgeted in her chair, avoiding eye contact and clearly struggling to find a quick answer. Frustrated, I kept pushing, asking her why she had come home with soiled underwear and pressing her for an explanation. She begged me to stop, saying she couldn't handle it anymore, then pointed out that we'd been married for 12 years and questioned how I could treat her this way. But I was fed up with the endless lies and constant denial. Gathering all the frustration I'd been holding back, I hurled my half-full coffee cup across the room, shattering the front of the microwave. This time, there was no question that I had Emma's full attention. The look on her face was one I hadn't seen before. She'd never seen me this angry. Leaning over the table, I raised my voice and demanded to know who Max Thompson was. She got up and moved toward the sink, trying to avoid the conversation, and kept repeating that he was just a friend. But I pressed harder, asking if he was more than just a friend. Finally, in a quiet, frightened tone, she admitted that he was. I pushed her further, asking if she had been with him the night before. With a bromax voice, she admitted it and begged me to stop, saying she was truly sorry. She stood by the sink, sobbing uncontrollably. I poured myself some fresh coffee, and just then, Emma's cell phone rang. Her eyes flickered nervously between me and the phone, and she suggested I answer it, identifying the caller as Max. I pressed the speakerphone button and greeted Max, who sounded tense and mentioned a missed call on his work line the previous night. Emma looked frozen with fear as I nodded. Max hesitated, asking if Emma was there and if everything was all right, and she eventually admitted that I was there and knew about their situation. I took over, addressing Max and telling him I had some things to take care of in the morning but would stop by in the afternoon. suggesting he have emergency contacts on speed dial. Max stayed silent, and I ended the call, slipping Emma's phone back into my pocket. Emma, now in her robe, stood trembling by the sink. I told her I'd be leaving soon but had one last question about the name of Olivia's boyfriend. She begged me not to ask, and in her panic threw another cup, which crashed against the tile wall behind the sink. In a Shamax voice, she finally gave me his name, Ethan Hayes. She told me she'd be back later that afternoon and instructed me to have my belongings out of the house before then. She added that her mom would be staying with the girls temporarily and that I could arrange to pick up anything that wouldn't fit in my car. She requested I avoid contacting her and said to keep her mother updated on where I'd be. Then she stood there in silence as I walked out the door. I had no idea what to do next, so I decided to go into the office and see Jason, thinking he had a right to know what was going on. It was easy enough to piece together that Olivia had met Ethan at work and introduced Emma to her group. Max was probably just a friend of Ethan's in need of a date. I might have simplified things, but I felt like it was close enough. Jason wasn't in the office, likely busy with a bidding project, so I called him on his cell. I told him everything I'd discovered about Emma and Olivia seeing other men, explaining how their meetings and Tupperware parties were just cover-ups for social gatherings. He found it hard to believe at first, but I suggested he ask Olivia about Ethan Hayes from her workplace. I had a hunch that she might have introduced Emma to someone from her office. When I mentioned Ethan's name, Jason sounded stunned, saying they graduated together. I also mentioned a guy named Max Thompson, describing him as tall and thin. I figured Emma would be calling Olivia soon to warn her since she'd given me excuse after excuse before finally confessing. After our call, I went to HR to request a short leave, knowing I wouldn't be able to focus on work. It only took a few minutes to transfer my tasks to another draftsman. Shortly after, Emma's phone rang again, and Olivia's name showed up on the caller ID. I answered, pretending to be Emma, and casually asked what was going on. Olivia sounded apologetic, thinking she was talking to Emma, and mentioned that Jason had found out something at the office. Suppressing my anger, I pressed her to explain what Jason had learned. She said she was planning to take Emma home and hinted that now wasn't the best time to bother her since she was busy packing. This revelation caught me by surprise. Emma was actually planning to move back with her parents? I let the silence hang for a moment, enjoying the pause as I imagined the panic running through Olivia's mind. I suggested she give Ethan a heads up, mentioning that Jason would probably be stopping by and might appreciate a head start. Olivia was shocked, gasping, "No, God, no," before hanging up. Her nerves were something else. Since we only had one credit card, canceling it was no problem. We also had a shared debit card, and it only took me a few minutes to change the PIN. I wasn't sure what to do about the checking account, so I left it alone for now, still needing it for bills. I just hoped Emma hadn't Tomax any receipts. My own phone rang shortly after. It was Jason, calling to tell me he'd chased Ethan out of the Gilbert building and caught up to him in the parking lot. Jason was now in jail and wanted me to call his brother in Lancaster to bail him out. I made the call. There wasn't much else I could do for Jason at this point. After grabbing lunch at Taco Bell, I headed over to my parents' place to explain everything. Mom was more than willing to help with the girls, staying with me during the week while the twins spent Weemacs with them. Finally, it was time to check in on Max Thompson. The guys in Gilbert's drafting department were eager to fill me in on Jason's visit earlier that morning. Their office overlooked the parking lot and they'd seen the whole thing. Jason had caught Ethan just before he reached his BMW, throwing him over the hood of a car and hitting him. Security guards tried and failed to pull them apart, and eventually one had to use a taser on Jason. They weren't finished with him yet when they loaded him into the police car, and Ethan had to be Tomaxed to the hospital by ambulance. One of the guys pointed out Max Thompson's office. It was already empty. Word was Max had quit that morning. We walked by Olivia's desk, which looked untouched, though it seemed she was still employed. In about 10 minutes, I managed to get Max's home address and headed to the parking lot. Max's place was a small ranch without a garage. A white Lexus sat in the driveway with the trunk and back doors open. As I approached the door, Max came out with an armful of clothes, but the moment he saw me, he dropped everything and dashed back inside. I tripped over the pile he'd left and saw him slipping out the back door as I walked in. His reaction made me laugh. Unlike Jason, I wasn't here to throw punches. The place looked like a furnished rental, which explained why he didn't have a moving truck. He'd have been gone in another 10 minutes if I hadn't shown up. I would have liked a word with Max, but I wasn't about to chase him down. I looked around, finding a few interesting items. His cell phone was on the living room table next to a folder with his passport and some personal documents. A sleek laptop sat on the dining table. I gathered these few souvenirs and left. I resisted the urge to mess with his car, not wanting to do anything that could be considered criminal. The whole thing felt like justice. Unable to fully resist the temptation, I let the air out of just one of Max's tires. He'd have to empty his trunk to get at the spare, likely keeping one eye on the street, half expecting me to show up again. I planned to check in later to see if he'd gotten the message. Afterward, I headed over to the jail to check on Jason. He and his brother seemed wrapped up in legal details, so I just gave him a wave and a smile, figuring he was handling things well enough. By the time I got home, Mom was there, and dinner was ready. After a quick chat, I took the items I'd picked up from Max's place to my office, where I kept my computer and personal things. But before I could even start looking them over, Beth and Britt came home from school. I decided it was best to explain things before they asked questions, though I didn't get the chance. Bethany rushed up, full of questions, wanting to know why Grandma was here and where her mom was. I explained that her mom and I had decided to take a break, and she'd be staying with her parents for a while. Chloe, clearly pleased, announced that she'd won a bet against Bethany, gloating that her guess was right. She boasted about it, explaining they'd argued over whether Mom was cheating on me. Bethany quickly denied having said anything about that, but added they weren't exactly clueless about what was going on. She admitted Chloe was right and that Mom had indeed been cheating on me. Then, as if scolding me, she asked why it had taxed me so long to find out, calling me slow and too trusting. Chloe, acting mature beyond her years, placed a hand on my shoulder in an attempt to console me. It felt strange. A 12-year-old girl comforting her dad in the middle of a family crisis. She went on to share that one Saturday, when Mom and Olivia said they were heading out to shop at King of Prussia, Mom wouldn't let either of us tag along, saying it was an adult shopping day and promising to make it up to us later. But on Monday, when we got to school, 2 kids claimed they'd seen her with a man at Nobles Grove. We dismissed it as a lie at first, but then one of the girls pulled up a photo on her cell phone. I tried to brush it off, thinking there must be some logical explanation, but Britt insisted she was cheating. When I asked why they hadn't told me, they both just shrugged. A couple of weeks later, Tracy Mercer's parents saw Mom, Olivia, and 2 men together at TGI Fridays in Allentown. Tracy told us after her parents mentioned it when they got home. I just sat there, speechless. Thankfully, Grandma had invited us to dinner, and I made it through without the twins bringing up the subject. I apologized before dessert, and they decided to let the matter rest for the night. I felt a small sense of relief. Later that evening, just as I started looking through Max's laptop, his phone buzzed with a new text message. It read, Dax 4 Synth YJ Dear Max. Sorry for the love, Emma. Now, I may not be the best at texting, but I didn't have trouble decoding this. It was sent from Olivia's phone, meaning Olivia and Emma were likely together. I couldn't resist letting Emma know I had Max's phone, so I typed back, TAJ. The next couple of hours I spent going through the files and folders on Max's laptop. I found no emails between him and Emma, but there were plenty of messages exchanged with friends back in Lancaster. What I read shocked me, and it was a blow I didn't expect. Emma and I had been together nearly our whole lives, yet here she was, apparently closer to Max within a year than she had ever been with me in almost 2 decades. While replacing the printer cartridge, I realized tears were streaming down my face. I wasn't typically this emotional, but her betrayal had hurt deeply, and now the reality stung even more. Maybe because of my tears, I ended up printing out several emails and a dozen photographs. I would have printed more, but I ran out of paper. None of the photos were explicit. They were just the type anyone could look at. Beth poked her head in and asked if she could call her mom. I didn't feel right saying no, so I agreed. Mom stayed with the twins as they talked to Emma, and she caught most of the conversation. She wasn't eavesdropping, but the girls weren't exactly trying to keep things private either. Later, Mom told me that the girls didn't go easy on Emma, holding her responsible for the whole mess. Their call ended in less than 5 minutes. The emails I found were pretty revealing. Max had apparently been hired as an engineer on some alternative energy project in Spain, with a start date 6 weeks away, though he hadn't told Gilbert Engineering he was leaving yet. Olivia probably knew, but no one else seemed aware. Max had all his paperwork ready for the trip, except for his passport, which I had. He could try getting a replacement, but he'd need to act fast if he wanted to keep his start date. I figured he might consider reporting it stolen, but I doubted he'd go that far. He hadn't even booked his flight yet. One of the letters to a close friend shed light on a lot of things. Emma planned to file for divorce and follow Max to Spain. She'd realized I wouldn't allow her to take the girls out of the country, so her plan was to paint me as an unfit father. The letter didn't spell out exactly how she intended to do this, but it implied she'd go far enough to revoke my visitation rights or possibly even take full custody. It was appalling. Max wrote the letter, so it was all technically hearsay, but it was clear enough. I wished I had something directly from Emma, but I'd have to make do with what I had. I printed out several copies of the letter. After Mom dozed off watching Leno, I helped her to my room to get some sleep. The girls had already gone to bed, and I ended up sleeping on the couch, finishing off for beers. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon. Mom always made a great breakfast. The girls were finishing their cereal, and after some teasing, I got started on cooking the eggs. Everything was lighthearted until it was time for the school bus. I decided to have a serious talk with them before they left. I let them know that their mom might try to keep us apart by labeling me an unfit parent to gain custody, and I assured them that I would fight for our time together. I encouraged them not to take sides but to be wary of any stories. Chloe nodded, saying they were smarter than I might think and wouldn't let Mom ruin things between us. Beth gave me a reassuring thumbs up before they left. Afterward, Mom refilled my coffee and joined me at the table. She told me to relax, reminding me that everyone was on my side. After a shower and shave, I dressed a bit nicer than usual. Walking out the door with 3 cell phones felt odd, and I made a mental note to buy a charger for Max's phone, just in case. At the Family Services office, I waited to see my caseworker, and when she called me in, I was surprised to recognize her, Grace Foster from high school. She greeted me with a reminder of our shared past, mentioning that she remembered me from back when she hung out with the goth crowd, a group that often faced ridicule, especially from athletes like me. She looked much more conventional now, though I couldn't forget the pink hair and dark makeup. Her desk sign read J. Foster, so I figured she hadn't married. "John, what can I do for you?" she asked, interrupting my thoughts. I stammered a bit, acknowledging her transformation, which made her laugh. Apologizing if my comment was awkward, she waved it off, saying she dropped her goth persona halfway through college, realizing she was more comfortable being herself. She admitted she could sound patronizing and struggled with keeping her foot out of her mouth. Getting to the point, I asked if there were any files or reports on me. She confirmed that there was nothing under my name or Emma's, saying it looked like we'd been providing well for our kids. I mentioned I had twin 12-year-old girls, Bethany and Chloe, then explained that my wife intended to leave and take them. Grace acknowledged that it was a common scenario and asked if I knew her reason. I told her there were no complaints on file but worried about potential setups. She said that while the system showed nothing now, that didn't mean we were completely in the clear. My wife could be gathering information or waiting to report later. I shared my doubts about being set up, and Grace clarified that I could still fight if that were the case, asking why I suspected such intentions. Although hesitant, I decided to show her an email from Max. I handed her a printed copy, explaining it had been accessed through questionable means, so I knew it couldn't be used in court. I mentioned feeling trapped, unsure how to protect myself and the girls without a lawyer. Grace sat back, considering, and then leaned forward, advising me to come back the next morning. I agreed, asking to keep the letter copy, which she allowed. As I left, She said it was nice to see me. I smiled, catching a glimpse of a new side to Grace. Lacking any lawyer contacts, I picked one from the phone book. Even though Emma was moving toward divorce, I wanted to secure my position given the situation. Not knowing how our finances might look soon, I paid the lawyer upfront in cash. I told him to handle it as quickly as possible, saying she could have the house since it wasn't worth much more than the mortgage. I wanted joint custody of the twins, though full custody would be ideal. I agreed to child support but refused alimony. As I left for lunch, Jason called, needing a place to stay. We met at Taco Bell, and he greeted me with a grin. I asked what he was so happy about, and he told me a friend at the hospital had filled him in on Ethan. Olivia had visited Ethan, unaware that his wife and kids had also arrived. Chaos erupted, and security escorted Olivia out. Jason later checked in at Gilbert to speak to her, but she was gone. I asked about Ethan's family, and Jason admitted he didn't know why they weren't living together but didn't care either. He decided to take a week off work to settle things, planning to grab clothes from home. He wasn't interested in speaking with Olivia anymore. Later that day, as I made my way to see my insurance agent, I got another call from Nathan Bennett, Emma's father. He wanted me to come over to help sort things out, mentioning how upset Emma was and how her mother wasn't much help. The meeting was going to include Nathan, Emma, her sister Mia, and me. Even though I wasn't entirely clear on what we aimed to achieve, I agreed to be there in about 20 minutes. The mood in the room was heavy when we gathered. I had brought along a folder filled with evidence and skipped the coffee. "Who wants to kick things off?" I asked. Nathan said, "John, Emma feels you're overreacting. She claims you got angry and pressured her into saying things she didn't mean just to calm you down. According to her, she hasn't done anything wrong, and you have no right to kick her out." It was clear that my wife was spinning a version of events that made her look better in front of her parents. I understood her hesitance to admit to her infidelity, but I was angry that she was trying to lay the blame at my feet. Nathan wanted to hear the facts to grasp the situation better and asked what I expected him to do. Prove she was lying or accept that I made a mistake. I explained that Emma insisted she didn't have a boyfriend, just had a few drinks with friends from Olivia's workplace, but I pointed out that she had over 80 phone calls with this friend in the past month. I then asked how often she called Nathan and her mother. They both turned to Emma, who couldn't hold their gaze. I brought up Max's cell phone, and when no one spoke, I asked Mia to read a text message sent to Max right after I told Emma to leave. The message was an apology for any trouble and expressed love. Emma buried her face in her hands, and Nathan slowly shook his head in disbelief. I showed them photos from an outing that Emma and Olivia claimed was at the King of Prussia Mall but was really at Nobles Grove. Nathan confronted Emma about the hand-holding in the pictures, implying that Max was more than just a friend. Tears began to flow down her cheeks as reality hit her hard. I pulled out more photos showing they were Tomax at Olive Garden and Red Lobster. I thought about mentioning the stains I found on Emma's underwear but decided it was best to hold off for now. Nathan apologized for dragging me into this mess, expressed his frustration at being deceived, and shook my hand as I was leaving. Emma left the room sobbing like a child, and we didn't discuss the stains on her underwear at that moment. Nathan assured me that they wouldn't let this situation slide. When I returned home, Mom and Jason had already set up a fold-out bed in the living room. It wasn't a hallway, just a small extra room where I kept my computer. Jason had a pile of clothes in the corner that he had brought from his place. Olivia was out when he arrived. The most intriguing thing waiting for me was the mail, but it wasn't for me. It was for Emma. A beautifully official envelope from the passport department. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I couldn't resist. It was, of course, a passport, a family passport. The photo showed Emma and the two girls. I remembered the girls talking about getting their picture Tomax, but I never imagined it was for this. Of course, my passport wasn't in there. I quickly called Nathan and asked him to let Emma know her passport had arrived. If she needed it, she could just send Max to pick it up. I was only going to hand it over to him. I usually worked when the mail came, so I would have never known she received it. Nathan told me they had asked Emma to find another place to stay and had no clue where she was headed. They seemed a bit annoyed with their daughter. He promised to let her know about the passport. Dinner that night was mostly about the girls. Bethany, with a shy smile, mentioned that a woman from family services named Grace had come to their school to speak with both her and Britt together. They had missed gym and geography because of the long conversation. Beth and Britt said Grace seemed to like me, even though it was just from a 1-hour chat. Mia interrupted dinner with a phone call wanting to talk. We met up at McDonald's, where she filled me in on Emma's situation. Mia expressed doubts about whether I could answer any questions, and I had to agree. She started by blaming Olivia for everything, saying that Olivia's affair with Jason seemed exciting and romantic to Emma. Emma claimed that her life with me was only loving and stable, lacking any thrill or romance. She got involved with Max Thompson when he joined Gilbert. While Olivia and Ethan were sneaking around, Emma and Max found themselves alone, leading to a full-blown affair. She couldn't, or wouldn't, end it because Max had enchanted her with stories about his life and promised her a trip to Spain, which she jumped at. The biggest dilemma for Emma wasn't leaving me. It was leaving the girls. She knew I would never allow her to take them abroad, so she plotted a way to make me look bad. Mia explained that after talking with the girls, Emma realized they were closer to me than to her. Consequently, she decided not to fight for custody if I agreed to a divorce without any strings attached. I agreed to move forward without contesting it. Mia then mentioned that Emma wanted to get her passport and asked if I had it with me. This raised my suspicions about Emma's intentions, and I worried she still had hopes of taking the girls with her. The family passport was crucial in her plan. I replied, "Mia, my coffee is cold. I'm heading home to take a hot shower. Don't call me again." "John, what the hell is wrong? Why are you upset? You know exactly what you did. Do you really think I'm that naive? Go back to your sister and tell her there's no way she can take my daughters. Since you decided to get involved, help her out. I'll have to ask you not to talk to my girls anymore." Mia was already on her cell phone as I left McDonald's. I can only guess who she called. I arrived at the family services office before it opened. "You couldn't stay away from me, could you?" Grace walked in with a big smile and a Starbucks cup in her hand. She motioned for me to take a seat and apologized for not having more coffee. "I think you know that I talked to your daughters yesterday." I nodded, smiling back. For some reason, I felt a little tongue-tied and out of my element. I remembered feeling this way the last time I spoke with her. Having been with Emma all my life, I never really developed social skills with other women. I was starting to realize the cost of that now. "Is something wrong, John?" "Apart from everything, no. I wasn't trying to be rude. I just couldn't find the right words." "I'm so sorry, Grace. I think I'd better leave. I'm not quite with it this morning. I'll call you later. Before you go, I want you to know that I'm getting a restraining order against your wife. I can't prevent her from seeing or being with the girls, but I can stop her from taking them out of state or denying you access to them. It will be delivered to her before noon." That brought a smile to my face, but I still left the office. I headed to the nearest Starbucks. The coffee smelled incredible. Up until today, everything felt under control. Now I felt lost and confused. I drove around aimlessly for a while before heading home. Jason informed me that Olivia had moved back to her parents' house near AFA, so he was only returning to his place until he could sell or rent it out. He had spent the morning at the bank, the insurance company, and the law office trying to secure some money from Gilbert. Unfortunately, there was no company policy against fraternization, making his efforts an uphill battle, as his lawyer explained. While passing by the hospital, he learned that Ethan was being discharged. Ethan's wife intercepted Jason while she was completing discharge paperwork, thanking him for his help and explaining her attempts to persuade Ethan to drop the charges. Surprisingly, she had been trying to patch things up with Ethan for years without any success. After Jason left, I sat on the porch with a beer. Mom brought me a meatloaf sandwich and joined me in silence, sharing the beer. She mentioned that Dad would come for dinner and stay the night. When Grace Foster arrived, Mom quickly retreated inside. Grace sat beside me, declining the cold beer I offered. We sat in silence for a few moments before she spoke. "I served Emma's papers about an hour ago. She was quite upset, by the way, staying with her sister. I finished the long neck I was holding. It may seem like a good thing, but why do I feel so bad? In situations like this, there's rarely anything good, John, just less bad. I pulled out another beer, hesitated, then returned it to the refrigerator. Could you come inside and explain all this to the girls? I get along with them, but no matter how carefully I phrase it, it might sound like I'm blaming their mother. I fear it could push them away. How about 7 tonight? I nodded, and she stood up, walking to her car. Halfway there, she looked back. A positive sign, and I smiled. She smiled back. Grace visited that evening and spent considerable time with Beth and Britt. Jason and I busied ourselves searching his house, getting rid of anything that reminded him of Olivia. Grace started coming over several times a week, spending just as much time with my mom as with the girls. I noticed she was avoiding me. While that suited me, I was still curious. One evening, after the girls had gone to bed, she sat next to me. I felt the need to talk to her, but she initiated the conversation. She asked if I had any wine, preferably with a cork. I explained that I had wine, but they all had screw caps. She found that amusing and requested something red, so I poured a bottle into a container that looked more like a jug. As we drank, I mustered the courage to discuss the girls' well-being. During her visits, she mentioned that the twins were doing fine and didn't necessarily need to see her. Surprisingly, she clarified that she came to see me, not the girls. I found myself puzzled by Grace's willingness to engage in conversation, as she rarely did so during her visits. She confessed that she thought I might have a rule against fraternizing with clients, and we both chuckled at that notion. To lighten the mood, she brought up tattoos and expressed surprise that I hadn't asked to see hers. I admitted that I had some tattoos from my high school days. 3 were quite visible, and 1 was more discreet. She playfully suggested a game to find my tattoos while keeping quiet to avoid waking the girls. The 4th tattoo was in a private spot, and I admired it for a moment before she left, presumably before the twins woke up. Still, I had a feeling they might have sensed what had transpired. I called my lawyer from the phone book to finalize and deliver the divorce papers. Emma, still staying with Mia, received the papers, but I heard nothing back from her. Several weeks rolled by, and my father's health took a turn for the worse. Mom spent more time caring for him than with me. Thankfully, school ended, and the girls spent the summer with her. By summer's end, Dad was moved to a nursing home. Jason and I helped Mom prepare the family home for sale, and she moved back in with me. Throughout the summer, Grace visited the girls at their mother's home and spent 3 or 4 evenings a week with me. They went shopping and dined out together, and I appreciated the attention that Chloe and Bethany received. I no longer felt envious of their time together. I was fairly certain they understood what was happening between Grace and me. Emma called the girls about once a week, but those conversations were brief and often seemed tense, according to their mother. The twins didn't even mention her calls to me. Jason's divorce from Olivia was finalized, and I had no idea where I stood. He decided he wanted to start his own surveying business and asked if I wanted to join him. I didn't have enough money to contribute, but my mom stepped in to help. When she and her father ran out of funds, Medicare began covering his expenses. Instead of letting it all slip away, she thought I should invest it in the business. I believe she saw it as an investment in her future as well. 3 months later, Jason and I launched our small surveying business. Fortunately, my drawing skills evolved into storytelling. About a week into the new semester, the twins were visited by their mother. They expected to see Grace in the guidance office and were disappointed to find Emma instead. They tried their best to be polite and respectful to her, but it was still difficult. Emma told them she loved them both and expressed regret over how things turned out. She mentioned she was going to Spain to see the windmills and promised to send them postcards. She assured them she would call every year on their birthdays and promised amazing Christmas gifts. They said she cried when she left. Emma never called to inform me she was leaving, but the following week, her parents showed up at my house. They apologized again for Emma's actions but made no effort to justify her behavior. Chloe and Bethany were their only grandchildren, and they were eager to spend time with them. I had no problem with their request. They explained that Mia felt too ashamed to approach me, caught between her sister and her parents. 2 months later, my divorce was finalized. To celebrate, Grace and I chose Red Lobster for dinner. It was a rare evening without the girls, who seemed genuinely happy. I believe they were somewhat elated. We spent the night at a local Holiday Inn, and the twins greeted me with excitement at 10 o'clock the next morning. Though they didn't say it, their smiles spoke volumes throughout the day. A year later, everything was going well, but sadly, my father passed away. Mom considered moving to Florida with her sister but hesitated to leave the girls behind. The twins suggested that Grace should take her place, even if she couldn't cook as well as Grandma. They also insisted they were old enough to have separate rooms. It was a clear and practical solution. The girls received birthday cards from their mother, but there were no phone calls. She also sent numerous postcards featuring Spanish windmills, though I wasn't sure of their significance. For Christmas, she sent 2 stylish embroidered dresses, completely unaware that the girls were entering their teenage years and might soon have a growth spurt. Surprisingly, they didn't mind that the dresses were too small. Gilbert Engineering became our primary client. Jason was pleased to learn that Ethan was now teaching electronics at Lebanon County Vocational School. A significant downgrade. Ethan was no longer married, and Olivia had remarried and moved to California. Max Thompson didn't last 6 months in his new job and was now working in the States, though his exact whereabouts were unknown. Jason sought information through his high school's alumni association. My best friend always believed I had gotten off easy with Max. Strangely, the girls continued to receive postcards adorned with windmills, with no specific messages, just general sentiments. Nathan informed me that Emma had called them several times from her job at a travel agency in Barcelona. She never mentioned Max or revealed any details about their past. A year later, Grace and I quietly tied the knot in Maryland. She was expecting, and Chloe and Beth were as thrilled as we were. They looked forward to having a goth sister, sharing a private joke that they never included me in. The meaning behind those Spanish windmills remained a mystery to me.